The deep quiet of the Bavarian countryside in the spring of 1922 was a deceptive blanket, one that smothered sound and suspicion in equal measure. The farmstead, known as Hinterkaifeck, lay nestled in a clearing amidst dense, leafless woods, a good hour's walk from the nearest village of Groburn. It was a place of mud, manure, and isolation, a world unto itself where the rhythms of life were dictated by the land and the livestock. Andreas Gruber, the patriarch, was a stern, miserly man in his 60s, known for his sharp tongue and his fists. His wife, Cecilia, a few years his senior, moved through the house with the weary gait of a woman who had known little but toil. Their daughter, Victoria Gabriel, was a widow, a woman shadowed by local gossip that whispered of an incestuous relationship with her own father, rumors fueled by the fact that her husband had died in the war under strangely convenient circumstances. Victoria's children, Cecilia, 7, Joseph, 2, and the baby, Carl, just an infant, were the only sparks of lightness in the grim household. Their laughter, a fleeting, fragile sound against the constant lowing of the cows and the groan of the wind in the eaves. It was into this crucible of secrecy and simmering resentment that a malevolent presence inserted itself, not with a dramatic arrival, but with a slow, patient, and utterly terrifying infiltration. The first signs were small, easily dismissed by minds accustomed to the minor peculiarities of an old, sprawling farm. A few days before the end, Victoria mentioned to a neighbor that she had found a newspaper in the house that no one had purchased. Andreas grumbled about a set of keys that had gone missing, only to reappear in a place he was certain he had already looked. Then there was the sound. It started as a faint, almost imperceptible scraping in the attic, the sort of noise one attributes to rats or the settling of an ancient timber-framed building. But this was different. It had a rhythm, a deliberate quality that suggested something other than vermin. 7-year-old Cecilia, with the unvarnished perception of a child, told her mother she heard footsteps walking in the attic above her bedroom at night. Victoria, likely weary and wanting to soothe the frightened child, dismissed it as the wind or her imagination. But the little girl insisted, her small voice firm with a fear that was all too real. Then the farmhand, Karl Slupcher, who lived on the property, mentioned something odd to Andreas. He had seen fresh footprints in the snow leading from the edge of the wooded gloom towards the farmhouse, but none leading away. Andreas, a man not given to fanciful thinking, investigated and found the tracks himself. They were a chilling confirmation, a one-way trail left by an intruder who had come to stay. Even more unsettling, the intruder had used a path that only the family themselves used. Around the same time, the postman delivered a postcard addressed to the Grubers. It had no postmark, had no stamp, and contained only one single cryptic sentence: "The end is near." It was treated as a prank, a morbid joke, but the timing was a coincidence that would soon curdle into prophecy. The true horror, the element that would later fuel nightmares and countless theories, was the growing, unshakable conviction among the family that someone was already inside the house with them, not as a fleeting burglar, but as a permanent, hidden guest. They heard the noises not just in the attic, but sometimes in the walls themselves. A soft, shuffling sound, like a man moving through a narrow, confined space. A loaf of bread would seem to diminish faster than it should. Small items continued to be displaced. The atmosphere within the farmhouse, already thick with familial tension, became saturated with a new, paralyzing dread. It was the fear of the unseen, the known unknown lurking just beyond the thin plaster and wood that separated their living space from the dark, unused cavities of the building. They spoke of it to each other in hushed tones, their arguments now tempered by a shared, unspoken terror. Andreas, ever stubborn, refused to involve the police, perhaps out of pride, perhaps out of a desire to not air the family's dirty laundry, which was considerable. He took to keeping his shotgun close, a futile gesture of defiance against a threat that was already within the gates, already under his own roof. He could lock the doors and bar the windows, but the enemy was not outside. The enemy was in the walls, listening to their fears, learning their routines, and waiting with a predator's infinite patience for the perfect moment to strike. That moment came on March 31st, 1922, a Friday. The last known contact anyone had with the family was when a neighbor, Frau Meyer, spoke with Victoria and the little Cecilia as they returned from buying shoes for the children. They seemed normal, if perhaps a little preoccupied. The storm that had been threatening all day finally broke, blanketing Hinterkaifeck in a fresh layer of snow, isolating it completely from the world. Inside, the family went about their final mundane rituals. They fed the livestock, ate their supper, and put the children to bed. All under the silent, unseen gaze of the watcher in the walls. What they could not know was that their hidden guest had finally decided to stop watching. Sometime after dark, he emerged from his hiding place. He did not come as a thief in the night, but as an executioner. His weapon was not a gun, which would have been too loud, too quick, and would have denied him the intimate, brutal communion he sought. It was a mattock, a common farming tool known as a hackstock, a heavy, pickaxe-like implement used for breaking a hard ground. It was a tool of their own livelihood, now perverted into an instrument of their annihilation. The killing was methodical, savage, and thorough. The first to die was likely Andreas Gruber. He was lured to the barn on some pretext, perhaps a noise, a disturbed animal, or maybe he was simply ambushed as he went for a final check. The attacker struck him with immense force, the pointed blade of the mattock crushing his skull. He fell, his life extinguished in the familiar, smelly darkness of his own barn. Next was his wife, Cecilia. She may have come looking for him, or perhaps the killer sought her out. She met the same fate, her head shattered by that same relentless tool. The farmhand, Karl Schluchter, was the third victim, dispatched with the same brutal efficiency. With the adults who could put up a fight now dead, the killer turned his attention to the house. He entered, a shadow now made flesh, his weapon dripping with the blood of those who had trusted in the safety of their own home. Victoria Gabriel was his next target. She was killed in her bedroom, bludgeoned repeatedly. The violence was excessive, a frenzy that spoke of a deep, personal hatred or a deranged, uncontrollable rage. Her 7-year-old daughter, Cecilia, was in the room with her. The little girl, who had been so frightened of the footsteps in the attic, witnessed her mother's murder. For this, she had to die too. Her death was particularly brutal. Forensic evidence would later suggest that she had lived for several hours after the attack, her small body clinging to a spark of life in a house of death. Her hair torn out in clumps, likely as she was dragged by her feet from one room to another. The killer then moved to the children's room. 2-year-old Josef and the baby, Karl, were still in their beds. They were smothered, their tiny lives snuffed out without a mark, a strange, almost merciful contrast to the carnage that had befallen the rest of the family, yet an act of such profound cowardice and evil that it defied comprehension. Having completed his grisly work, the killer did not flee. This is the detail that elevates the tragedy from a mere mass murder to a legend of pure, unadulterated terror. He stayed. He covered the bodies of Andreas, Cecilia, and the farmhand in hay in the barn, as if to delay the discovery. He then returned to the house and went about the business of living for the next 2 to 3 days as a blizzard swirled outside, sealing the farm in a frozen, silent tomb. The murderer resided at Hinterkaifeck with his 6 victims. He fed the cattle in the barn, stepping over or around the hidden corpses to do so. He milked the cows. He ate food from the larder. He stoked the fire in the stove to keep warm. He slept in their beds, walked on their floors and breathed the air that was still thick with the iron scent of their blood. He was the ultimate parasite, consuming the life of the farm as he had extinguished the lives of their inhabitants. This was not a crime of passion that culminated in a panicked escape. It was a sustained, calculated act of possession. A monstrous ritual where the killer consolidated his victory by inhabiting the space of his victims, becoming the ghost in the machine of their home. The outside world, meanwhile, began to notice the silence. The children did not show up for school on Saturday. The Grubers were not seen in church on Sunday, a glaring absence in a pious rural community. Smoke was seen rising from the chimney, a false signal of life. That was in fact the killer tending his fire. On Monday, April 3rd, the neighbors' unease could no longer be contained.